We're
Each
on
grab a
to it.
drink here.
Hey, YouTube theologians, welcome. Pastor Wolfmueller here with Vicar Josh Pauling, who's written. You can hold that book up. Are we all cyborgs now? This is talking about AI. It's fantastic. I mean, I've been thinking about it more and more, Josh. And I think that even the Pope didn't he take the name Pope Leo the 14th now because of the importance of addressing AI as a technology. Did you
Hmm.
hear about that? I mean,
I
I
didn't
think
hear
this
about
is
that.
this is a huge issue that I've been thinking through, and I'm looking forward to thinking it through with you. Can you introduce yourself and how this topic became interesting to you?
Sure. Thank you so much, Pastor, for this opportunity. Really looking forward to talking with you today about a topic that's coming out as fast. It's already here, and it's going to keep coming. So this book project really emerged over years of thinking about this issue and other issues related to technology. For a long time, I was a high school history teacher. And seeing the way technology was impacting education specifically and impacting students, right? I really feel like it was sort of a canary in the coal mine moment, seeing how all these things were unfolding with teenagers who were sort of running an experiment on them in real time. So I'd really dove into the philosophy of technology, reading a lot of the great authors in that field, Lewis Mumford and Marshall McLuhan and Neil Postman and a bunch of other figures that have been thinking about these questions long before AI. And I really think that they are prophetic on a lot of these questions. So this book project emerged out of experiences as a teacher, as a person who'd studied theology, philosophy, and history deeply. And so I teamed up with Robin Phillips, an Eastern Orthodox thinker, on this book to put together a resource for Christians thinking about these questions when it comes to AI in the classroom, when it comes to technology in the home, when it comes to technology in the church, technology in politics. How is this digital environment or ecosystem we're living in really impacting us? And how do we take a step back from all that and think about these things theologically, right? And also, I would say anthropologically. What does it mean to be a human being, right? So that's just a little bit about how the book emerged. I'm a vicar at All Saints Lutheran Church. I've been a teacher by trade in the past. I also do quite a bit of writing for a variety of publications, both online and in print. And things like that. So there we go. Where do you want to go
Let's
from there?
let's start with the technological imperative. So can you tell us about what that is and what it means, and maybe like, so I you know we I'll tell you a really quick story. When
Sure.
I was 18, I was working in a very remote Fijian village, and
Mm,
they didn't have water or electricity. And one night, we were sitting up with a couple of guys, and we were drinking kava, and a couple of the old elders of the village started yelling at each other in Fijian, and I couldn't figure out what they were talking about. And I asked the guy next, "What are they arguing about?" He says, "Electricity." I said, "What do you mean
mhm.
electricity?" And they said, "We're trying to figure out if we should get it or not." And I said,
Yeah.
"What?" I just assumed that they didn't have electricity because they couldn't have electricity, not because
Hmm.
they and why? And both of the elders had agreed actually that electricity would totally transform their culture. The question
Hmm.
is it worth it or not? So they were having that question, is the technology worthwhile? Which and that has helped me to fight against the technological imperative. That means that if
Yes,
we can do it, we should do it, and that
that's
there's
right.
no question about the introduction of the new technology. So, flesh
Totally.
us out in that direction.
Yeah, I love what you're saying there, Pastor. That is exactly where we start the book, that we need to push back against the technology equals progress narrative, right? That just because we can do something, we should do it. Instead, we have to ask, ought we to do it, right? The sort of the is ought distinction, right? And so we start the book there with that very, very, we call it a myth of technological progress. Instead, we need to realize that technology equals trade-offs, right? And as you said, the leaders of that tribal village were exactly thinking about that question, right? Not the sort of imperative of progress or the assumption of progress, but what types of human trade-offs are we incurring when we adopt new technologies, right? Electricity is a great example of this. Obviously, the Amish would be another community to sort of look at in their relationship to electricity. And we talk about them a little bit in the book as well. I call it steel manning the Amish, right? It's easy to critique the Amish, and certainly we'd have theological concerns about their beliefs and also the way they interact with culture, right? Their attempt to withdraw from culture obviously has some problems if we think about our Lutheran understanding of the two kingdoms and things like that. But when it comes to questions of technology, they're asking the right questions. They're asking, how does this impact my family? How does this impact my community, right? What does it do to the sacred precincts of the home? And those are the exact types of questions that I think we need to be asking. So that's the first step in all of this. You're exactly right. You need to take a step back from the assumption of technological progress and instead frame it as technological trade-offs and realize that, technology is certainly giving us things, but it's also taking away things. And especially it has a way of steamrolling what came before, right? And that's, I think, another danger with all of this, that technologies steamroll prior assumptions about what it means to be a human being, prior understandings that we have of the universe, of the world, of our relation to others, right? And so that's I think especially another aspect to think about.
So technology will always present itself as it'll present its benefits to you. The problem is the what detriments are not part of the selling point. But
That's
we
right.
can't. We don't want to be ignorant. I mean, we don't want to pretend like there's no benefits to this. I mean, for heaven's sakes, we're recording this on Zoom. It's an amazing
Right?
sort of thing. This interview is
Sure.
going to be posted on YouTube, which
Hmm.
is in some ways phenomenal. And we see this in the Reformation where the
Sure.
technology was able to publish the Word of God. But
Hmm.
there's a caution, maybe a twofold caution there. So number one, we have to be able to identify what we're giving up, right?
Yes.
And and also, I think in the Reformation, and this is maybe I don't know if you tell me if this is interesting to you. I was another very quick story. At some point in 2017, I was supposed to go lecture on the next 500 years of the Reformation, which was a weird
Mm-hmm.
assignment. So I was at
Hmm.
some, I don't even remember where it was. And I was trying to figure out what even talk about. So I went back to 1917 to find out what people were saying about the Reformation a
Yeah.
hundred years ago and to see
Hmm.
how things are different now. And here's the amazing thing that I noticed is 100 years ago, they said the Reformation was two things, Martin Luther and the Holy Spirit.
Hmm.
And now when you read anything about the Reformation, it's the Reformation was two things, Martin Luther and the printing press.
Mm.
And our understanding of history has even changed
Sure.
to this understanding of the story of advancing technology, which I think needs to be critiqued. This kind of evolutionary understanding of what history is in
Hmm.
simply the growth of technology. And that doesn't mean that then we ignore technology, but we can understand it under the sovereignty of God. But so anyway, there's a couple
Yeah.
of I don't know if you want to riff on any of the thoughts that are in there.
Yeah, I might just say that, once we break down the myth that technology equals progress, then we can realize instead that technology is trade-offs, like I said, but that technology also is not neutral, but that it's nudging us somewhere. It's nudging us in a certain direction. So you mentioned the ability to record this, right? That's a great gift. But we also need to consider how it's nudging us in a certain direction. And what I mean by that is it has certain assumptions baked into the technology, right? And this is true with any technology. They're not neutral. We need to get away from that idea that they're neutral. They're first off, they're not found objects, right? They're designed objects, and they're designed by a designer who has a certain perspective on the world and certain assumptions about what this thing would be used for. So if we think about digital technologies and this recording that we're doing right here, certainly a great gift. But it is a disembodying technology by its very nature, right? I'm not flesh and blood in presence with you, right? I can see a digital representation of you. I can hear a digital representation of your voice, but it is disembodying by nature. And it is also, I would say, something that gives us a false sense of autonomy and control by nature, right? If I don't like how this is going, I could just click X and be done with it, right? Um, and people who are watching it later could speed it up, slow it down. They could pause it. They could, again, click off of it. They don't like it. They give it a thumbs up, thumbs down, whatever. All of those sort of, I call them liturgical gestures in the book. These little activities of control that the digital medium like fosters, right? So if we're going to use these technologies, and I'm not saying we shouldn't, right? We need to realize how they're nudging us. And I would say at least in those two directions, towards disembodiment, towards control and fight against those nudges, right? To use the technologies against the grain. So yeah, I think that's all I'd say at this point. But
I
yeah,
was thinking about the two ways to fight it. This is true not only for like YouTube, because I imagine most people who
yeah,
are watching this by themselves. And so to
yeah,
notice, like, hey, dear YouTube theologian, here you are watching us talk, but
yeah,
you're solo. Make sure that in fact you plan on taking whatever we're talking about and talking with it with a real person.
yes,
And
that's great.
also to engage in these things with a pen and paper. Like I
Yeah.
think, okay, watch as
Hmm.
much TV as you want. Now, okay, I should take my own medicine because I'll admit that I don't do this. Watch as much TV as you want, but take notes on what you're watching. because because what actually happens is that kind of that act of self-awareness lets you realize, wait a minute, I'm not, this is like, am I writing notes on these commercials? Like, I really want to
Hmm.
remember this. No, I don't care. I'm actually actively trying to forget the things that I'm being told.
Hmm.
This is the
Hmm.
opposite of helpful information. So that kind of self-awareness, or that kind of sinking you down into the real thing, is
That's right.
a real now. Okay,
Yeah,
there's been these technological leaps, mostly in communication. It's very interesting that
sure.
where like where things are progressing technologically and where they aren't. I was
Hmm.
reading a Peter Thiel
Hmm.
book for the 0 to 1 book, where he talks about basically technology has stalled since the 70s, except in information technology or
Hmm.
communications technology. That's really
Yeah.
interesting. So we
Hmm.
see this like massive advance going from communications, so that's radio, TV, telephone, then to the internet, and then to Web 2.0, and now
Hmm.
the next step, and also smartphones, all these devices,
Sure.
individual devices, and now especially with AI. So each one of these was a leap. Maybe there was a kind of a gradient one to the other, but
Hmm.
uh, and you mentioned so some of these technological philosophers were, way before
Hmm.
all of these things, but they predicted them in some particular way. So
Sure.
talk about the flow, the
Yeah.
growth of communications technology, and
Sure.
I want to push us to AI in that.
Sure. Yeah. 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 That's great. Um, So first off, the critique of technology is not new at all, right? We can go at least back to Plato. Plato critiqued writing, right, and was worried that it would atrophy human memory, right? And he wasn't wrong.
There's that funny
Um,
myth story that well, who is it at the very beginning of Technopoly that Neil Postman tells
yeah.
about? It was a
Hmm.
Thebe, the king of Thebes,
Hmm. That's
is
right.
asking the god if he doesn't really want the gift of writing. It's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so I just want to acknowledge that the sort of the critique of technology has a long tradition. And because this is what I get a lot when I present or write about this. Well, you're just saying the same thing people said a long time ago. There's nothing different about this. But I want to get to the point why I think there's even something more substantial now. So yeah, there's ancient critiques of technology, like Plato. You could fast forward to the telegraph. Thoreau critiqued the telegraph, warning that it would degrade local community and break down local community. He has a famous quip that when we finally connected the Atlantic across the Atlantic Ocean from America to Europe, that the first message we'd get was that the Queen's daughter had a cold, right? Like, why do we need to know that, right? So, information overload even then. But then really you get to the Industrial Revolution and the critiques really pick up, right? If we think about critiques of technology, and obviously Thoreau would be part of that with the telegraph and so forth. Um, so yeah, we have the telegraph, the telephone, the television, right? Skipping the radio in there as well. And as each one of those roll out, there's certainly critiques in this tradition of the critique of new technologies. And really the concern in general has to do with our humanity, what it means to be a human being. That's what these critiques are getting at. With each new technology, how can we still maintain and retain our humanity in this changing environment, right? And I would even put the Luddites in that category when new technologies to make clothing faster emerged. They started smashing machines, right? And the Luddites are sort of the classic, thing that gets brought up if you're questioning technology. Oh, you're just a Luddite. But I think they also were onto something, sort of like the Amish, right? I steel man the Luddites a little bit in the book too. Again, not that we go and smash machines, but they were realizing what it was doing to their relationship to their community, their relationship to work, what it means to work, um, and also how that changed their relationship to the family unit, right? So they were on to concerns that are valid. Their response, obviously, we could critique. So all that's to say that there's this long tradition of critiques of technology. It really speeds up during the industrial age. And then we get to the emergence of digital technologies. I know I'm skipping a lot here, but let's get to where we are here. Um, And the critique of technology, I think, really ramps up even more in the digital age because digital technologies are different. They're not one-use tools and they're not static in nature, right? If we think of prior technologies that changed things, they were primarily static tools, right? Mechanical technologies, right? Think of like the power loom that the Luddites were so upset about, right? That was taking away their work that they used to do by hand, right? The steam engine, right? The automobile. These are all mechanical technologies. Certainly massive impacts on life, on work, on family, on transportation, on communication. But you didn't live in those technologies, right? They weren't an ecosystem. They weren't a habitat. They weren't an environment the way digital technologies so easily become. And perhaps even more, they didn't talk back in the same way that digital technologies do. And perhaps even more, they weren't designed to, I would say, hack our attention in the same way, right? They weren't built with persuasive design in the way that digital technologies many times are. So that obviously is a whirlwind tour of the philosophy of technology, but that maybe brings us up to speed a little bit to where we are today.
Well, and it nicely tips your hat on the concerns for digital technology because I think I heard about five, but that it does it creates an environment. It has it hacks the attention. It's there to be persuasive, and it's a worded technology. In other words, it
Hmm.
has to do with information, and it
Hmm.
connects to us in that way with as in human speech. So
Yeah.
maybe so bring out some of the dangers there, both in terms of, I mean, I think the first kind of layer of dangers would be like, well, here's what's lost, and then secondly, in that in that list of what's lost, how does that change our understanding of humanity or our acting human?
Okay. So let's take this one by one here. So what was the first one again here?
What's lost? What's so
Okay.
let's and take maybe just pick one like
Sure.
I don't know, smartphones. Just say
Okay.
or social media or
Sure.
whatever's the easiest one to kind of
Yeah.
as an illustration.
Yeah, I think the smartphone is a great one to use just because it's so ubiquitous. And I think that was another game changer when the computer essentially went portable, right? So what's lost with the smartphone? First off, I'm not acknowledging there's no gains, right?
Sure.
I think those are self-explanatory and we all realize those, right? And it's almost naive to waste our time there. But let's deal with the side that we a lot of times forget what's lost. Well, first off, I think it forecloses a lot of opportunities for boredom
Mhm.
and for friction, right? And those might seem like silly places to start, but I think they're really important aspects of what it means to be a human being, right? There's risk and friction in the real world that these devices frequently cut us off from, right? Because the nature of that medium, right, especially the smartphone, it's frictionless, it's resistanceless, right? Um, and so instead of having to encounter real people in all sorts of scenarios in the flesh and blood, right? You can actually cut off those experiences by simply having your device at your ear or in your hands as you're going about the world, right? And so you're cutting off yourself from opportunities to encounter other real live human beings and bump up against all sorts of things that actually require us to grow as people, right? Um, Confrontations with ideas, right? Limitations of physical space, right? All of these things that I think are central to our growth that we are more and more avoiding because we have the easy out of the device, right? So that's one that I think a lot of times we don't think
It's
about. Not so much.
I want to
Yeah,
hone in on that because what
yeah,
so this you're what the thing you're saying is that because those are benefits. I mean, they're presented to us as benefits. Like for
right.
example, I you know it's been years since I've actually looked at a map, and I
Hmm.
it's very difficult to be lost.
Sure.
Now I can always just see where I am, and that it would be like, hey, this is a benefit. You won't get lost. And you're saying, but that's actually that itself has a downside that I don't have to like. I mean, I remember I just tell my kids these
Hmm.
stories of Like when I would get lost, I
Hmm.
spent 8 hours driving around Juarez, Mexico. When I was 18 years old, I had no idea where to go, and that could, you couldn't do that anymore.
Sure.
So, so that's
Yeah,
phenomenal.
and
That's
again, I'm
like
not
even the
saying we
downside of
shouldn't
the benefit.
use the GPS capabilities and all that, but what I'm trying to get at is again these trade-offs, these nudges, and the fact that if we outsource everything, or if we remove all of the friction and all of the risk inherent in the human experience, at what point do we cross a threshold, right, of artificiality that is really hard to sort of recover from and retain that essence of what it means to be a human being? Think as well the selfie experience, right, where we really perform ourselves and exist through the device rather than experiencing the world directly, right? The device becomes another layer that mediates reality to us. In the book, I call the device a reality mediating mechanism, right? That instead of experiencing the world directly through our bodily senses, which God has given us, right, we add another layer to that, right? The screen mediates the world to us. I think that's another aspect we don't think about enough, that God has designed a multimedia experience for us, right?
Hmm.
The world experienced through our five senses. And when we add layers to that, um, what does that do, right? How is it obscuring our experience of the world, of each other, and even of ourselves?
Talk about then. So take us all the way now to AI. So,
Okay.
and maybe even, I don't know. Can you give me your best definition of what the thing is? I, I've been
Mhm.
I've been spending just so I'm very excited about this conversation because I really do think the AI questions are, at least they should define this month or this
Yeah,
year.
yeah,
I do think this whatever this thing is a disruptive thing in our human history. So, and I have a theory about it,
yeah.
a wacky theory that I'll
Okay.
maybe tell you in the end, but or in a bit, but I don't know what it is. This is the problem. I don't know, and I guess the people who made it don't even know exactly what the thing is. So your best shot at
Yeah.
what is AI?
Well, I'm hoping we can flesh this out together, and I hope as well that the church can flesh this out together. We need each other on this question. These are hard questions, and they really bring about it's like at the intersection of theology, right, philosophy, and I would also say anthropology, right. And so we have a lot of resources to bring to bear on this, but it's hard to really be an expert in all those things, right? And then there's the technology side too, right? Being an expert in that. So I'm coming at this really as I would say a generalist, right? I've got some background in theology, philosophy, and history. Um, and those are the things I'm trying to bring to bear to this discussion of AI. I am not an expert in the technology side of it, and that's not my role, right?
Sure.
But I think I can help us think about the right things and ask the right types of questions. So first, when we're talking about AI, I think we need to make a distinction on what type of AI we're talking about, right? So definitions here. So if we're talking about what we call maybe narrow AI, or sometimes it's called weak AI, that's being used all over the world, right? We use it all the time. That's basically pattern recognition, right? Large language models, right, are basically we'd call that narrow AI, where you have a computer system with a massive database of information and algorithms that filter it in certain ways, right? Um, and so narrow AI does one thing and does it well in general, right? And it's something that we might think normally requires human intelligence, but a form of narrow AI can be trained to do that task. Um, so I would say it simulates intelligence in that narrow field, right? So it's really an imitation or mimicry tool. Um, uh, and the probably the experience most people have of this is with some form of chatbot, right? Chat GPT, Google Gemini, things of that nature. Those are what we'd call narrow AI or weak AI, or some people would call that generative AI, right? Because it is generating something. And that is certainly an amazing feat of human ingenuity and engineering. And I would say technology stacking, right? We're stacking up all of these technologies that humans have invented through many, many years to do this amazing thing. And it is amazing, right? Um, but part of the problem is we don't really understand it, right? So then we start to anthropomorphize it, or we start to think it's conscious or it's a being, right? Um, so I think one of the challenges first is to get behind the curtain, right? To open up that black box to try to reduce the tendency to anthropomorphize it or think it's something more than what it actually is. For example, I don't anthropomorphize my lawnmower, probably, even though well, some people give names to their cars and vehicles and technologies. There's an old tradition of that. But my point is that just because it's a complex technology, I don't automatically assign sentience to it, right, or consciousness to it. Um, so that's first, if we define narrow AI. Then there's this sort of broader concept of strong AI or AGI, right? Artificial general intelligence. And this idea, which has not been achieved yet, and I'm not sure if it actually is achievable, um, AGI can imitate all aspects of human intelligence, right? Um, and so this would be there's different ways that these theorists think about achieving this goal. One would be to merge human intelligence with machinery in some way, right? To create sort of a super intelligent hybrid, if you will. The second way to achieve AGI is to use non-organic or inorganic materials to create a brain, if you will, the neural network model, and then sort of upload our thoughts to that in some way. So AGI, first we want to separate that from narrow AI. So once we make that separation, I think then it's easier to maybe answer the what is it question. I don't know if what you want to add to that or where you want to go from there.
Well, I'd love to know. I mean, because I think the two, well, you can tell me. It seems like the two endeavors are related to one another. In other words, this kind
Hmm.
of narrow use case of the large language models is connected to this is kind of experimentation and petri dishing out what might be possible with a
Sure,
bigger model, right? So it's not
definitely.
like Gemini and Anthropic, which talk about a
Hmm.
crazy name for something
Hmm.
or whatever.
Yeah,
That they're not also interested in the AGI. In
sure.
other words, they see a kind of evolutionary connection between the two. Is that right?
Yes, yeah. No, that's a really good point. They're part of the same big project, right? The
Right.
overall project. Yes. So I
What
don't
do
want to
you?
make a more of a distinction than there needs to be. But I think definitionally, it's just important to understand
Sure.
what's going
Oh,
on there. Yep.
it's helpful. What have you found? So it also seems interesting to me, the people who are doing this. So the people who are working and driving this thing and pushing it forward, they also have an agenda, and it's not like it's a kind of hidden agenda. They'll tell you what they're doing, and it mostly seems like it's connected to the Silicon Valley kind of whatever this. Oh, what is it? I mean, this transhumanistic
Yeah.
integration of kind of achieving eternal life by making us more
Sure.
mechanical. What have you seen in how they've talked about what the goal of all of this is?
Yeah, you bring up a good point that a lot of the Silicon Valley leaders, this AI project is closely connected to the larger vision of transhumanism, right? The attempt, the ability to transcend human nature, um, and go beyond our humanness, if you will, through technological means, right? And for some, this is a vision of really getting out of the body completely, right, and having a disembodied form of existence, right? To sort of upload your consciousness eternally. For others, it's really transcending the body by continual improvement, right? The attempts to live longer, right, through technology, by enhancing the body through nanotechnology and things of that nature. So yeah, I would say you're right. AI is situated in this larger concept of transhumanism. And if you think about transhumanism from sort of a theological perspective, it's really a distorted form of Christian eschatology, if you think about it, right? It's an attempt to achieve immortality, right? Which we will one day achieve in the way God has ordained it to be so, right? But they're trying to do it technologically. So I think that's helpful too, to think about it as a distorted form of Christian eschatology. So AI is sort of a route towards that, right? It's working in that direction, moving in that direction. And if you listen to or read the writings of people like Sam Altman, for example, OpenAI, and some of these other guys, Nick Bostrom, Thomas Chalmers, uh, they're clear about what they're trying to do. They really do believe that it's possible to create some form of super intelligence, right? To to evolve beyond our current existence as Homo sapiens, right? To become Homo Deus, as Yuval Noah Harari puts it in his book of that title, right? So they actually say the quiet part out loud if you actually listen to them and read them.
Now here, so there we got we're at a divergent spot here.
Okay.
Let me. Okay, here's where I want to go, but I want to. If we go that way already, we're going to miss a bunch of things, and that is that, like, how do we look at all these attempts from a Christian worldview, knowing that the Lord is sovereign? In other
Yeah.
words, we have such hard constraints on our own hopes or fears because of the Lord's promises. So, for example,
Yeah.
we know that we will not destroy the human race, that humans will not bring about the destruction of the human race because Jesus will come back first. Now, we might be
Mhm.
on the path and Jesus might
Sure.
interrupt it by his second coming, but we
Yeah.
know that that's not going to happen. We, so,
Yeah.
we know that the Lord is in charge of all of these things. And so I want to think about technological progress from the angle of the Lord's sovereignty. But if we go
Yeah.
that way, we're going to miss this stuff that I also want to pull in. And so maybe just to do like a cost benefit analysis of the narrow generative AI. How do you,
Mm.
and you mentioned a conversation with Dr. Nordling
Yeah.
in your email. I did this thing, oh, I don't know, a year ago at the very beginning
Yeah.
of Chat GPT. And
Hmm.
I'm thinking of this thing as a mega search engine that knows everything.
Hmm.
So I asked it this thing that I could never figure out, but I think it could. I said, what Greek words did Paul invent? And I thought it can look at all these Greek words from all these different things and see which ones show up for the first time in the chronology of language that are by the pen of St. Paul. And
Yeah.
it just made up nonsense. It was
Yeah.
just so it
Yeah.
was just but I asked it again 2 weeks ago. I hit the
Hmm.
deep research button,
Hmm.
and I had it do the same thing. And it came up with this, I mean, it thought for, I don't know, it worked on it for like 45, 50 minutes and it came up with 6 words that it proposed were invented by St. Paul that had never been used in the Greek language before, and that Paul used them to be able to articulate certain Christian concepts. And
Hmm.
it gave me the resources so I can go and check it out. And I sent it to
Hmm.
Dr. Nordling. And I
Okay.
got what I think you got when you were talking to him. I got a very similar rant, which was,
Hmm.
I can't believe that the machine can do this, and now
Yeah.
I'm out of a job. Like,
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
so maybe there's a cost benefit analysis of the generative AI
Yeah.
generally
And
in the
this
church.
is an area that I'm struggling with myself, and I know everybody is trying to figure out how to relate to it, how to use it, how to not use it. So I don't have a firm position for everyone. And I would not want to bind anybody's conscience on this issue. I'm more trying to raise the questions we need to be thinking about, right? And for me, it's really a question of um, if we continually go to the machine for these hard tasks, right? Will we atrophy ourselves? Will our human capacities and abilities and capabilities start to diminish and decline? And also, and this is what Dr. Nordling and I talked about a little bit this past summer, is that all of the hours and time that he spent, right, mastering Greek, slaving away, right, memorizing vocabulary and reading and all of the aspects of difficult intellectual work, right, that forms you into a certain type of person, right? It forms you into a virtuous person, I might even say. And if all of those things are now easily achieved, right, by you know, entering the prompt just the right way or managing the AI, if you will, how do we actually become virtuous then? right? I think that is a real question. Because, some of that mundane, boring work actually is like essential to life. And if you think about how God works in the world, he frequently works through mundane means,
Hmm.
right? Think of vocation, right? Extremely mundane things, changing diapers and, digging in the dirt and all of the very embodied and messy, tedious tasks of being a mask of God, right? And part of that is the human experience,
Right.
so I don't know where the line is. I really don't. But again, if we don't ask those questions, I really fear that we are just we're risking going down this path, not in a apocalyptic way, right? But in a way that really forecloses our own opportunities for growth, right? It's through risk and strain and challenge that human beings actually grow and flourish, right? We're
Right.
anti-fragile creatures, and all of these technologies make it so easy, right? Um, and again, not that there's no place for that, right? I'm not saying we get rid of our washing machines either, right? But especially with such an immersive ecosystem of technologies that it's so easy to live in a disembodied way, in an autonomous way within, right? I think we need to ask these questions even more carefully. I have a list of 4 questions here. I'm just trying to find them.
Yeah, yeah.
This is from a friend of mine, Grant Martsolf. He's a professor in Pittsburgh, and he's really been digging a lot into the question of especially LLMs and AI in relation to education. And he's developed just 4 simple questions that he thinks that he's really asked his students to ask. He has a class that he teaches about human flourishing in the digital age, and he has really developed a series of lectures and readings where he takes students through this. And he has these 4 simple questions. It might be a good starting point.
Yeah.
So here's what he says. Questions to ask about the use of LLMs. Question 1. What are the relevant capabilities I'm relying on to achieve this goal? Okay, so in other words, what human capacities and faculties and skills am I relying on to achieve this academic goal or intellectual goal? Okay. Question 2, what likely happens to the capabilities that I currently use to achieve this goal when I adopt this new tool to do them, right? In other words, what happens to my abilities when I adopt this new technology to complete the goal for me, right? So here's the trade-offs question. And then the third question, do I want these capabilities to weaken or disappear? Right? Do I want these capabilities to weaken or disappear? So once you sort of do the cost benefit analysis, then you have to ask yourself the serious question, do I want those trade-offs in my own life, right? And then the fourth question, if I lose a capability, on whom am I now dependent? And what is my relationship to this person and institution? So here's the question of now, who am I dependent on? What am I dependent on? Right. And right now it would be a few tech companies, right, that are running this whole show who don't have our best interest in mind, which has already been made clear by all of the revelations about social media and Facebook and all the rest behind the scenes when it comes to their attempts to hack our attention, as I've said, and get to the bottom, race to the bottom of our brain stems with persuasive design. So those are 4 simple questions you can't ask. There may be more that we would ask as Christians, right? He's at a secular university, and these are the questions that he's asking his students, sort of in this setting, right? But I think it's a starting point
I think I do too. I
to
do.
work through.
I don't like. Yeah, I do too. But I think
What are we
there's
missing there? Yeah,
yeah,
fire away.
there's something that's not. uh, So I'll give you a use case as I was thinking about it
Sure.
and reflecting on Dr. Nordling's email because
Yeah.
like it was great because he wrote back and he says, "But I think your machine missed one." And he gave me a word that he thinks Paul invented, as far as he can tell. And it's hard to know what words Paul invented because you have to know like all of Greek literature, right? And so there's some people that spent their whole
Right.
life, but he spent hours and hours and hours determining that this particular word that Paul uses in Philippians chapter 2 was invented by Paul. And he says,
Yeah.
here's what's lost is all of that, all of those hours it took me to learn that. But
Hmm.
here's my response to that is, well, it didn't take me any time to read that in your Philippians commentary. And I'll give you another example.
Hmm.
I when I
Yeah.
was a baby pastor, I spent about, oh, I don't know, I probably spent 200 hours comparing the four gospels accounts of the Passion Week, and I put it in a
Hmm.
chronology. And I
Mm.
did it all. I hand did it because I wanted to do the work. I wanted to get in there. I wanted to look at the different words. I wanted to try to figure it out. I wasn't pleased with all of the chronologies that have been done before. So I spent all this time working on it. And then
Yeah.
just this last, I think, Lenten tide, I said, I wonder if the machine can do it. So I asked for this thing and it did it. Whap, like this. And I
Hmm.
was thinking the same thing. I mean, all those hours that I spent digging into the text were a huge
Mm.
benefit to me. But
Yeah.
they were not that huge benefit to the thousands of people who just downloaded my PDF of the chronology
Right. Right.
already online. In other words, that's the work that we're doing now, like the thousands and thousands of hours that we do to be good communicators of whatever thing is
Sure.
then communicated instantly with people. And here is where I think the huge advantage of the large language models is, I think, is that if I'm looking on the internet for a chronology of Holy Week and I find it and I download it and I say, hey, it looks pretty good, and I go with it. But if I ask the machine to do it, I actually bring a skepticism to the thing because I know that it just makes stuff up that actually
Hmm.
makes me go and research behind it. In other words, the because it's an emergent technology, it doesn't have the authority that I would give to something like, I don't know, Encyclopedia Britannica or
Sure.
any published book or even
Hmm.
Wikipedia. I mean, this is one of the
Sure.
advantages of Wikipedia is you got to check out the notes and make sure it's not making stuff up.
Yeah.
But it's
Yeah.
even more so there. Like it can know everything, but you got to always check your sources. Anyway, I,
Sure.
I'm
Yeah.
just
Two things I'd say to that. This is great. This is really good. First off, um, you as a person, right, have developed your faculties and capacities and intellect over years and years, that maybe gives you the skills and abilities to analyze what AI is putting out, right? But if individuals never go through that process, will they be able to detect AI slop versus something that's valuable, right? So in other words, here I think we might have to think about ages, gateways,
yeah, yeah,
and it again, this is all emerging. This is like the Wild West. But my point is, if individuals growing up now, right, like students now, who can chat GPT anything, right, they don't even know if what's being produced is actually good or not. They don't even know the right questions to ask to see if it is good or not, right?
right.
Which again require brings us back to the prior questions. How do we what type of people are we wanting to form,
Yeah,
and how do we form them, right? To the point where maybe they can harness these things in a way that actually is kept in their proper lane.
I
But I don't see any of that happening in high schools or colleges. Instead, what's happening is they're going to these things to do all of their work, and in their own testimony are saying, "Yeah, I can't think on my own without
yeah, that's
ChatGPT.
an amazing.
I can't put together a thought myself, right?" And I think that is where I would say, well, yeah, because you've not actually formed and developed those capacities yourself. So that would be one thing. Maybe there is some type of um, formation that needs to take place first to harness and leverage these things in a way that is acceptable. And then the second thing I would say is there something categorically different uh, from between material that is created by a human agent, right? All of the hours you put into developing that PDF of the chronology, right? And to something created by a non-human agent.
Right.
And I would think if we're going to do our anthropology and theology correctly, I think we'd probably say yeah, because that human being is created in the image of God and has, through the course of their life, through embodied experience in the real world, developed knowledge, wisdom, and virtue, and can bring all those things to bear on information, if you will, right? So I would say again, I think there's a clear distinction between computation or calculation or information, right? And comprehension,
Right.
knowledge, and wisdom.
I think about I kind of so I remember when I was I don't know, when I was a young man, first married, and I was building stuff for our family, and I knew that it would take me forever and ever to build it, but it was good to do. This is maybe the thing. So
Yeah.
I thought I need to learn how to use hand tools before I get any electric tools.
Hmm.
So for about 10, maybe 7 miserable years, I did everything with a handsaw, a
Yeah.
planer,
Hmm.
and a drill, like the awl kind of,
Yeah.
what do
Yeah.
they call, the brace, they call it.
Hmm.
And
Yep.
I did everything that way. And then finally I said, okay, I think I understand how wood fits together and things like this. And so then I got then I started getting the power tools which is
Sure.
so, and so maybe that's
Yeah,
just
you're
the,
speaking my language. I do woodworking as a little side hobby to generate some side income. Yeah, and I was the same way. I started out with hand tools to learn the trade a little bit, and also because it was cheaper. And there's also some nostalgia there, right, and some romanticism for sure. But yeah, once you learn those things, you understand how wood works, how grain works, right, to go with the
Mhm.
grain and things like that. Power tools become a great thing to add to your repertoire, right? And also, if I'm making a piece of furniture for sale, right, to generate income for myself, then I'm going to definitely use those time-saving methods. But I'd also be foolish not to recognize that that's changing my relationship to the wood, right?
Right, right.
Um, and how I think about the process of woodworking. Yeah.
So there's a parallel. I remember I try to teach some people the getting things done method just to kind of organize
Hmm.
time and things like this. And whenever I'm walking someone through the baby steps, I said, you just use a pencil and paper for everything, just so you
Hmm.
can understand it. Before you use any electronic tools for anything, just start with pencil and paper. And so that if you start with those basics and you can work on those basics, and then and it gives you a framework for being able to, and maybe that's the word, but it's not, but that's not it, because there's something more going on. It's this idea that it pushes you in a certain direction. There's
Hmm.
and maybe it's just this too, that we like some things, some things we just want to speed read, and some because you're just trying to get the thing. Like if I get a piece of mail from the Texas district, I don't I'm not reading it out loud for the artistry of it. I just want to know
Sure.
the info and then throw it away.
Sure.
If I get a poem, if I get a note from my son, or I'm reading the Psalms, I don't want to just like download the info.
Right.
I want to get the thing. So I think
Yeah.
when I go to the chatbot, it better not be to engage in poetry, but if it can help me to upload the info, here's another use case.
Mhm.
So I think the strongest argument against the young age of the Earth is radioactive decay,
Okay.
and I don't know anything about that stuff. So when I'm driving around one visit to another, I say to the chatbot, "Hey, tell me about radioactive decay." And now I know all about the uranium to lead stuff and how the half life of the isotopes and all this use cases. And then I know it's just because I can just ask the thing questions, and it can apparently know all the things and then just feed me the information. So I'm just trying to upload all this stuff as fast as I can, so that I can sort out how I ought to think about that as a Christian and so forth. It's the kind of thing where I think if I could just if I could just get the information into my head without any, there's no joy in that work for me at
Yeah.
all. I just need to know the stupid stuff. Uh, some people
Well,
might have great joy in that, and they're drawing pictures, and I don't know.
yeah.
So
Well, if I could push back just a little bit there,
yes, yes,
respectfully, um,
no, push hard,
you
man.
know,
Don't.
the very language you're using there is machine language. You're
Yeah,
uploading information to your brain, right?
exactly.
And I
Well,
think this is again part of the problem. We've absorbed the machine as our template,
yes,
right? We think the brain works like a computer. And there are certainly aspects of the brain that we can make comparisons and analogies, but it is not a computer, right?
yes,
The way
right.
a computer processes is not the same as the way a brain processes.
Yep, yep.
And so we need to be careful, I think, with using those information processing models of brain intelligence, and also just the way it's so easy to absorb those mechanical and digital ways of thinking about ourselves, right?
Yeah,
As if each information bit needs to be operationalized in some way.
yeah.
But if
No,
you think
that.
about, like, especially the way Proverbs talks about wisdom, right? It's slow, it's embodied,
Yes,
right?
yes.
It's represented by gray hairs, right? And seeing many seasons. Yeah. So there's again, that's just part of this whole thing that I'm trying to get us to take a step back to these root questions that
Yes.
then can help us more faithfully, hopefully, address these things, in our individual lives and use cases. And then there was one other thing there I was thinking too. The use cases that you're coming up with are also very different from the way this is being marketed and advertised to the average person, right? If you think about the ads for these things, it's tending to be relational, right?
Yes, a companion.
Companionship,
Yes.
friendship. Again, those oh my goodness, those embodied and relational aspects of what it means to be a human being, and those are the last things that we want to outsource to the machine, right?
Right.
God has made us embodied beings and relational beings. Um, and to think that this man-made thing, right, this chatbot, this companion, this AI girlfriend, this
Oh,
playmate, even these, I'm going to say it, sex bots, right, all of these things that are attempting to fulfill these very human embodied relational needs. This is how it's being marketed and sold to the
right.
masses,
Right.
which again, I think they're saying the quiet part out loud.
Yeah.
And that is where I think it's coming fast and hard. And the church, I think, needs to be ready. And I don't think we are. We are not prepared to deal with the parishioner who comes in and says, I formed a relationship with a chatbot. I have an AI girlfriend,
Hmm.
right? Um, and this is not a fringe phenomenon. There are boatloads of people that are interacting with chatbots as companions, as friends, as intimate partners. And when you add the ability of deep fake pornography and video generation of your companion, uh, I don't even want to think about where all that goes. There's a guy, Peter Lindbergh, on Substack, who had a great piece recently on the AI playmates and girlfriends and even sex bots, and it is scary stuff, and it will be here before we know it if it's not already. So yeah, how are we prepared to provide the shepherding and pastoral care to our people
Yeah.
who are spending hours of time with chatbots? And I just saw this in a kid's book yesterday in a bookstore. AI buddies, right? It was in the storyline. There was an AI buddy that the kid had. So that is just
Yeah.
I don't
That's
even know what to say.
that's dystopic. I have also a theory. Like I always have an optimistic theory about that, about the sex bot stuff. But I want to
Hmm.
come back to it. But
Yeah.
so I really appreciate what you said. So we don't want to take this kind of computer language and apply it to our own consciousness or minds. And maybe just to reference the folks that are watching, I did an interview with Dr. Greg Schultz about
Mhm.
Cyril's Chinese room,
Okay.
which is this master metaphor that he uses that tears down that idea that the human brain is a computer. And
Mm.
so, and it's very, very helpful. And your caution is well taken. What I am trying to do is that sometimes I want to engage with things as pure information,
Yes.
and just like, for example, a phone number. I just want it there. Whap.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't and there's no like beauty in a certain phone number or whatever. It's just like whap. And if I don't have to whap it there and if I can keep it here, fine. There's not like, okay.
Yeah.
Other things I want to engage it in a different way. And to your point on the difference between knowledge and wisdom is that knowledge has this cumulative effect. So here we
Hmm.
are, I don't know, 6,000 years into human history, and we've accumulated all this knowledge, although we've lost a lot too. But that wisdom has to be reborn in every generation, right? There's no
Mm.
cumulative wisdom. We
Yeah.
are all working on that. And the danger I think that we're facing is that we've reached such a point of culminated knowledge that anybody can know anything that is knowable, but with just by searching on their phone for it. It's pretty amazing. And so that it used to be like knowledge and wisdom were even related to themselves in some ways, but what we have is a complete dearth of wisdom. And having all of that knowledge with no wisdom, I think that might be just the point that you're making. You get all this knowledge, you got no wisdom. That's not going to end well. I mean, what can you do with that knowledge with no wisdom? Is just blow everything up. I mean, that's where it all, you know, you can blow up your ego, or you can blow up a building, or you just that's where it leads
Yeah.
if you have no wisdom.
Yeah, and this is where I think education and Christian formation are so important to help us bring that knowledge into the realm of wisdom, right? That the process of becoming an educated person, the process of catechesis, growing in the faith, right? And I'm putting these two together, education and Christian formation, because I think they best go together, right? Um, but yeah, that's why that process is so important, so that we can make sense of all the information, right? Um, the idea that the problem of education is a question of information access has not been true for a long time. The question of education has always been, how do you make sense of the information and put it into a unified whole, right? The idea of the university, right? Um, and we still need that. We need that more than ever. And I would say there was one other thing I wanted to say there, and that is I don't even know if we really know it, if we have a lot of knowledge. Again, there's lots of access to information. But I'm going to go back to Quintilian here, who said, you only truly know what you retain by memory. You only truly know what you retain by memory. So there's, again, something embodied, something essentially human about knowledge and wisdom that I'm not saying Quintilian is necessarily right. I'm just, the question
So
isn't a new question.
yeah, I think the pushback on that is that so it wasn't the prophets who questioned writing because we had the Ten Commandments from the finger of God. So I think it only is the pagans who can question writing because they had to inherit it from the Lord. And I think that there's something there in that, even embedded in the dominion that the Lord gives to Adam, is that we are authorized by the Lord to be inventive. Now, that
Sure.
doesn't mean that again, the technological imperative it doesn't exist, but that the Lord wants us to have the Bible written down as so we
Yeah.
know that that's also His will. So,
Right.
I think that Greek skepticism towards technology is not. I think we already have a prophetic pushback on that.
Yeah, well, we have a book, a chapter in the book on the theology of technology. We trace technology throughout the scriptures, and Jacques Ellul has a great book on this too, in a book called "The Meaning of the City." He was a French philosopher and theologian from the 1900s who also wrote a lot about technology. Um, but the what I would say on that is, yes, you're right. God has ordained the use of certain technologies, if you will, in the spreading of His word. Right? Think of as you said, the Ten Commandments, the inscripturation of His word. Right? Even the technologies that are needed to make bread and wine, if you think about it, right, with the Lord's Supper. So yes, there are certain ways that God has so ordered the universe and structured reality, ways that He can communicate Himself, or He has chosen to communicate Himself redemptively, right? And we certainly don't want to obscure those means and methods. And I would say, the book is, again, I would put it in a different category than digital technologies, because it's physically permanent object, right? And the brain interacts with that differently. There's lots of brain studies on this. Reading
Yes.
on a page versus reading on a screen are very different for the brain, right? So that's one thing I'd say there. And then the other means that God has chosen to use, right? As I said, baptism, Lord's Supper, these very incarnational, fleshy, sacramental realities, right? These are the spots we need to be doubling down on, right? Where God has chosen to come to us through the mediums and means He's chosen, bread and wine, word and sacrament, right? All of those types of things.
You
But if we trace technology through Scripture, yes, certainly, Adam and Eve in the garden wouldn't have just been digging with their hands, right? They would have been using technologies and tools. But once the fall occurs, it is very interesting to see that technologies as they emerge are usually associated with the line of Cain originally. Um, and there is a sort of a somewhat ambiguous connection between the city and technology, the city of man, if you will, and then certainly Babel, right? This technological grasping to build their way up to God and to sort of bring God down on their own terms. But then we have redemptive uses of technology, right? When God gives Oholiab and Bezalel the abilities to make all the beautiful furnishings for the tabernacle, right? And then we have
or the
a
ark
holy city,
itself, or the
Jerusalem, right?
Noah's Ark. Yep.
God is redeeming the city, if you will, with Jerusalem, Zion, right? And then if we think about Revelation, we have, well, let's first go to Christ. Christ was a tekton in Greek. He was a craftsman, right? He wielded the hammer and the chisel. He worked with real materials, and in some ways, he was crucified on a technology, the cross, right? That was a technology of death that the Romans had, designed. Um, And then we get all the way to Revelation, and we have it's not a garden, it's a city, right? Which again implies technological development and growth. So yes, certainly there is a role of technology throughout the story of redemption that culminates in the city, um, where you might say that all of these materials God has designed find their destiny, right?
Hmm.
Where gold that's in the earth finds its destiny in the streets of the New Jerusalem, and the jewels that are in the earth find their destiny in the crowns and all that, which is beautiful, right? But it is redemptively working there through the sovereignty of God, right? Through
Hmm.
God's plan and design. And Scripture, again, also I think shows that human beings in not when they're not in a right relationship with God, technology is a real danger. And I think especially the line of Cain, the connections there, make that pretty clear, and the Tower of Babel explicitly does so.
It is this weird thing that we have such a hard time imagining like the new heaven and the new earth with
Sure.
electricity. It's like Middle Earth, you know.
Yeah.
Like there's technology there, but it's not. There's no electricity, and maybe you ride a horse, but there's no cars, and
Hmm.
but I'm not 100% sure. Well,
Yeah.
this is, I mean, part of I mean, technology presents itself as a solution to our scarcity, and I think that's probably why our imagination of new heaven and new earth,
Yeah.
which has no scarcity, has such a difficulty.
Right.
I want to
Well,
loop
we
back
do
to,
know it will be embodied and it will be more real than our reality
that's
now,
right,
right?
that's right.
So some of our technologies are attempts to bridge some of those gaps as a result of the fall, which we won't need to do anymore, right? And so, yeah.
I
Mhm.
have two optimistic theories that I want to get
Okay,
to because I think in this space we have very kind of pessimistic conclusions that we make. So I
sure.
want to run these both by you. So the first has to do with this idea that of the AI as the companion and especially the dangers of perversion, and not just with AI but with the access to all of the perversion that's on the internet in general.
Hmm.
And I have seen, I think, a I I think that especially this generation of young people and especially this generation of young men, part of their shift in being more theological and more conservative, even politically, which has been noted, comes from the ubiquity of pornography. And I think it works in this way, interestingly, is that the that that every human being is tempted in one way to sexual immorality, but especially for young men, the temptation comes in a particular way to engage in illicit material. But but part of the, I don't know, whatever, of that, the temptation is that there's a hunt, there's a seeking, there's a secretive thing, there's an adventure to it. It's a wicked adventure, but there's a wicked adventure to it. And now that's gone. It's just there. It's
Hmm.
2 seconds, and it's anything beyond what you could even imagine. This utter
Yeah.
wickedness, so that it just that the sort of gradual way that the devil would tempt people into this sort of thing in the past is gone, and you're just overwhelmed with it. And I think the disgust and the emptiness of it is now more is apparent, and that the guys, I think women too, but especially the guys, are like, this is empty. It's not, they like, I've got to the end of this thing. Maybe in the past you would never ever you could never reach the end of it. I mean, it was way way off, but now I've reached the end of this thing, and it's not only not pleasing, it's disgusting. It's so obviously disgusting. It's like the prodigal son goes straight to the pigsty. It's like he leaves the father's house and you dump him in the pigsty, and he immediately is like, ah, I don't want this. And it's done damage to the conscience. It's done damage to the soul, which sexual sin always does more than any other, like Paul says. You commit outside the body. This is inside the body. But
Hmm.
it's thrown people back to say, no, I want a real life with real friends and a real family and a real job and a real church and a real confession of creation that will last until the new heaven and new earth. Because whatever that thing is, I don't want it anymore. And I
Hmm.
think that the devil has overplayed his hand in the ubiquity of these things, and that's part of the impulse for all of the young people coming back to church.
Hmm.
Thoughts on that?
Yeah, what you're saying is really good. That the church needs to be that embodied community, right? This real living body, right, of Christ that is doing life together, that is receiving from God's hand the gifts He gives in the divine service, and then serving and loving one another throughout the week. And that is a beautiful, rich thing. And yeah, there are certainly there's been a bit of a vibe shift, if you will, in the last few years where um, there's been more openness to Christianity, especially amongst young men specifically, as you said, which is great. And they're looking for something deep and rooted and ancient and robust and rigorous, right? They want to be challenged, and the church has those things. Um, but for each one that does make its way back, there are certainly many that get lost in these digital wastelands, and that is a sad reality as well. I mean, if you think of places like Korea and Japan, where birth rates and marriage rates are even lower than ours are here, in large part because these digital replacements have become so alluring. So I agree we should not be pessimistic. I agree with that. In the book we talk about techno pessimists and techno optimists, and we try to put forward a tech realist approach. So I agree with you that we can have hope. We do have hope. The church will prevail. The gates of hell will not prevail against her. And we need to be that community, that real embodied experience for people, because we have the truth. We have the person, Christ Himself, who who is the most real uh, person that there is, right? Fully human, fully God, and fully alive, and we can be united to Him by grace through faith.
Oh, thank you. So here's
Um,
another optimistic theory that to run by. So do you remember this was it That Hideous Strength, the third of C.S. Lewis's space trilogy?
okay,
And there was this nice institute and they were doing all this
sure.
transhumanist nonsense. And one of the things they were trying to do was bring back Merlin. And so they bring back Merlin and he comes back and he's a Christian. And they're like, "What?" And he's like,
Mhm.
"Well, of course, God is real." No, so okay. So this is my theory. This idea of artificial general intelligence, who knows if the thing is possible? I don't know. I suppose the Lord would have to allow it. Maybe one of the signs of the end where Jesus says there'll be lots of signs to deceive. But if it happens, or even as this narrow AI is able to process more information in reality, I think that it will confess the resurrection of Christ and the creation of the world. In other words, I think as Christians, we should not be afraid of reality. We know the truth of all of these things. And so it seems like as the machine is able to sort of become a processor of data in that is real, it seems to me like it'll confess the things that we confess insofar as it can confess them. What do you think about that theory? Like Merlin, who turns out to be on the wrong side of things.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I don't claim to be a prophet, but I wonder if that's likely or possible for two reasons. One, that these things are programmed with certain biases or assumptions. And granted, there's a lot of things we don't understand with how they answer certain questions, or even the designers of these things when they go beyond their, inherent limitations and bounds that they've been programmed with. Um, so that would be one thing. And then the second thing, I don't think they function based on a theory of truth that aligns with reality. There's a uh, researcher in this field, Eric Larson, who wrote a piece on uh, AI's theory of truth. And in it, he argues that AI has a coherence theory of truth, not a correspondence theory of truth. And we as Christians in general, historically, have had a correspondence theory of truth. There's basically there's more than three, but three basic ones: pragmatic, coherence, and correspondence. So, pragmatic theory of truth basically says if it works, it's true. A coherence theory of truth says if the ideas inherently cohere, then it's true. And the third one is correspondence. If the ideas correspond with reality, they're true, right? Now, you might say there's aspects of all of those that might be onto something, right? But in general, Christians have a correspondence view of truth that things are true as long as they insofar as they represent reality. And we know that reality because of the revelation that we have through Scripture, right? God has revealed reality. Um, AI functions on a coherence model, this guy argues. And I think he's onto something, that the goal of the AI isn't to actually speak truth, it's to live within its sort of self-coherent world of information. And that's why you can, you know, catch it in various inconsistencies with reality and things like that. So I don't know. I'm not sure.
Yeah. No, I think that's so it would have to be able to interact in profound ways with the real world to get there. But anyway,
Well, yeah, then you'd get the
my
idea
fear.
of embodied AI, which is another frontier that's being experimented with. What if we give AI a body, right? So
Hmm.
that it can experience reality the way a human does, which would be an interesting thing to explore as well. But that's beyond the scope here. The one thing I'd say there is though that still the connection between the body and the AI would not be a essential connection. It would be an accidental connection based on various programming and so forth. It's not
Yeah, yeah,
the way
that's right.
there's this unity of soul and body or mind and body that a human being has, right? One philosopher of technology says that the answer to that is that it wouldn't be able to get goosebumps, right? A human being can get goosebumps when it's moved. Uh, there's this intimate connection between mind and body that we just cannot explain. The AI's body would not break out in goosebumps when it, processed information. But that's sort of just a quick sort of quip rather than a long logical syllogism or something.
No, that's great. Beautiful. I want to end with thinking just a little bit about the governance of God and AI. So the assumption is that we have it because the Lord wants us to have it. I think that's how we receive everything in life. So the Lord, should we receive good from the Lord and not evil, as Job says, for example. If the Lord wanted to withhold this from us, he could have. He didn't. Now that could be punishment or discipline. It could be a gift. It could be some mixture of all. That we don't know the mind of the Lord, but we know that He gives us these things for a reason. One of the most profound moments in my own this kind of spiritual or theological development was when I was with a group of guys, pastors, and we were discussing care for people with Alzheimer's. And Dr. Kleinig was there from Australia, and he says, brothers, we should reflect on why the Lord lets so many of his dear Christians get Alzheimer's. And
Mm.
all of a sudden it reframed the question for me. This is from the hand of the Lord. We receive it from the hand of the Lord. So how do we receive this from the hand of the Lord? We could receive it as a rebuke. We could receive it, et cetera, et cetera. But we have to understand that the Lord has given us this challenge and this he's put us in the times that he has because he wants us to be in these times. So to reflect on, and I think your book is in a profound way a reflection of that. Hey, we're in these times. How do we deal with them? But maybe reflect and you can take us home with this, Josh, on on how we receive these times and these challenges as a gift from God and rejoice as we look at the challenges that we have.
Oh, yeah, that's great. This is a hard one because they are challenging times, right? But I would say that one of the biggest things I see in this is an opportunity for the church to be the church and to provide the alternative to these issues and problems when it comes to sort of the digital world and AI and things of that nature. I think it's forcing us to more uh, uh, accurately and faithfully articulate what it means to be a human being. It's forcing us to catch up on the theology of the body. It's forcing us to more carefully and accurately think about what it means to be made in the image of God. And those are great things. And I think this community of the church, right? This chosen nation, this royal priesthood, these people who are called out, right? Can be a beautiful picture and alternative that will draw people in to this real embodied existence of life together and forgiveness and of personal care of, as you mentioned, as an
Mm.
example, of those with Alzheimer's, those with disease, those with sickness, those with disabilities. The church um, can never give up on those embodied relationships of care and love and service as we model the way of the master, right? The one who served and loved us. So I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful in this time that there are signs of hope along the edges. There are more and more people that are asking these questions, that are looking for deep answers about what it means to be a person, about what is consciousness, all of those types of things. And we as a church can be a place, a refuge that has the answers to those questions. And I'm also excited for young people with what's happening on these questions. Last year, I presented at a conference on AI and education, and there were about 100 people in the room. And at the beginning, I asked them to put up their phones so then I could promptly tell them to turn them off. And there were some flip phones in the room, and it was the young kids that had them. It was the 25-year-olds and the 22-year-old young teachers that had them because they had realized that they needed to make some decisions that were going to help them flourish. Now, that might not, again, be the decision for everybody, but I think we, yes, are going to have to make hard decisions on some of these things, and we need to be willing to do so. There's a bunch of new books that are coming out on how we can do this. There's a new one called The Tech Exit by Claire Morell. She actually just was at the White House a few days ago with the signing of a new bill, putting some limits around AI. And one of her big things is that there needs to be age gates, especially when it comes to children with AI chatbots and things. But that's sort of a side note. But my point is that these questions are being debated and discussed at the highest levels, and that people are looking for an alternative. There was another new book called The Analog Family, The Opt-Out Family, because I think the family also is really key here. The family needs to be the place where embodied experiences, real life experiences are occurring so that we can build a reservoir of those things for our children as they continue to move in this digital age. That's going to be really, really important. So yeah, I'm hopeful. I think that we can do this. We can work on this together. And the church really, I think, is the greatest answer to this, where we have the God who took on flesh. He wasn't a YouTube video. He wasn't a TikTok clip or reel. He didn't come as an email or a voicemail. He came as a flesh and blood human being, and he still has his body.
And he gives us his body to eat and his
And he
blood to
gives us his
drink.
body,
Oh
right? We
boy.
become one with his body. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
this is I you know this is I mean so much of the devil's tactic is to mock the words of institution. This is my body. I mean
Mm.
that becomes the like the crusade of the abortionist cause. This
Hmm.
is my body, or the
Mm.
the transgender cause. This is my
Yeah.
body, or the transhumanist cause, or whatever. But
Yeah.
Jesus says, "This is my body given for you, so that we have a body also, and it's given
Yeah.
over in service to the neighbor." Hey, Josh, hold
Yeah.
up that book one more time. People can see it. They should get it. Let us know in the chat what you think about it. I really appreciate all the work you've poured into it and the thinking that you've done and this conversation as well. God be praised. Thank you.
Thank you. It was a privilege.